On her way home from the market, the woman took a shortcut through the cemetery. There, sticking up out of the ground, she saw a big bone. She picked it up and looked it over carefully. "This will make a very good soup bone," she said. "I think I'll take it home. It's perfect weather for hot soup." When she got home, the first thing she did was start the soup. Into the big soup pot went water, carrots, green beans, corn, barley, onions, potatoes, a snitch of beef, some salt and pepper, and the bone. She brought it all to a boil, then brought it down to a simmer. "Yum," she said, sniffing it and tasting it. "I can hardly wait till supper." Suddenly she heard a small voice. "Please, give me back my bone." The woman paid no attention. Soon she heard the voice again. "May I have my bone back, please?" The woman was reading the newspaper, and again she didn't take any notice. In a little while the voice spoke up once again. It was beginning to sound angry. "Give me my bone back." The woman kept on reading the paper. "Some people are too impatient," she muttered. Once more the voice spoke. Now it sounded very angry, and it was so loud that the whole house shook. "I want my bone back." The woman reached into the pot, grabbed the bone, and threw it out the window. In a voice just as loud she shouted, "Take it!" There was an eerie silence. Then the woman heard footsteps scurrying away from the house, down the road toward the cemetery. And she got up and served herself some soup. 27 years. That's how long it had stood abandoned. At least that's what everyone said. There were rumors that the abandoned house, now gray and mossy looking, its windows broken and some panels missing, was haunted by ghosts. Or that there was a portal to another time. There were also rumors that some people had tried to venture through the woods and visit the house to see if it was as spooky as others said, and had supposedly never been seen again. Pretty much everyone from the town believed the rumors. Melissa and Stephen, though, didn't believe them. To them, they were just stories to keep people out of the place. The stories that were meant to keep people away, though, only made them want to go in there. They liked spooky stuff and wanted to see just how the house looked inside. They'd been planning to visit the house for a week now, figuring out when they'd go there, what they'd bring, and how long they'd stay. Eventually, they decided to stay the night and made sure to bring flashlights, snacks, water, and sleeping bags. They hoped there'd be at least somewhere they could sleep when they got to their destination, and even though they thought there might be a good amount of dust and cobwebs, they were still happy about their venture to the woods. That morning, they'd gone to school like usual, and, at the end of the day, went and started walking the 4 blocks that would lead to the entrance to the woods. As they did, they talked about what they thought they might find, and laughed at the stories that they'd heard, even as recent as that school day. Eventually, they got to the woods, and after a short break, went and headed down the forest trail. At one point, as they were walking, and Melissa and Stephen were about halfway to their destination, Melissa started to feel like someone was watching her. At first she brushed it off, but after walking a few more feet, she felt it again. Melissa stopped walking and said to Stephen, "Do you feel that?" "Feel what?" Stephen asked. "It feels like someone's watching me," Melissa said. Stephen laughed and said, "Seriously? Come on, you've got to do better than that if you're trying to scare me." Melissa was silent for a short time before she said, "I'm serious. It feels like someone's watching me." Stephen sighed and said, "You're thinking about those stories too much. You're fine." He paused and said, "Come on. We've got to get going if we want to get there before dark." Even though Melissa wasn't so sure now about traveling further into the woods, she only hesitated slightly before walking with Stephen. She wasn't sure how long it had taken before the gray and mossy-looking house came into view, but to Melissa, it felt like a lot longer. She wasn't sure if it was the feeling of being watched or something else, but things in general felt off. She wasn't sure why. They just did. Before she could really think about it much, Stephen started walking closer to the house. Not too long after, she saw him go in. Melissa hesitated somewhat, walking around the house as the light started to fade from the sky. At one point, though, she heard, or at least thought she heard, someone calling her name. It was faint, and for a brief time, she thought it could have been Stephen calling her. She realized, though, that whoever was calling her wasn't Stephen. It was a voice she'd never heard before. Despite that, though, she now felt like she needed to go into the house. Melissa walked around to the front steps and started walking inside. Once inside, for some reason, the voice stopped, and she remembered that she hadn't come there by herself. She started looking around for Stephen, wondering where he'd gone, and wondering why she wasn't finding him. As she walked through the house at one point, things started to repair themselves. Furniture looked like new. Wall panels were no longer missing. Windows were no longer broken, and the dust and cobwebs that had been there were now gone. For a while, Melissa didn't realize anything strange had happened. At one point, though, as she was heading back through a section of the house, she noticed how different everything looked. For some reason, as she looked around, she wasn't afraid. Things felt familiar to her somehow. She felt like she was supposed to be there. She didn't know why, though. At one point, she felt like she should head into a specific room. It turned out to be a bedroom, and she noticed a porcelain doll with long auburn hair and a green dress on the bed. She walked over to it quickly and smiled as she picked it up and held it. "This is my doll," she said as she did. "I remember her so well. I didn't expect to see her here, though." Melissa looked around the room more and realized that she recognized the room too. It was her bedroom. Instead of thinking it was strange, though, she went and headed for her closet and started looking through the clothes to see if they, in fact, were hers. When she found out they were, she was happy. That is, until she suddenly saw the clothes in the closet disappear for a short time, then reappear just as quick. Melissa looked down at the doll she was holding, and instead of her favorite toy, she now saw spiders. She brushed the spiders off of her fairly quickly and ran out of the room she was in. As she started to quickly head for the door, she noticed things were warping and changing. When she noticed a good amount of spiderwebs starting to form and spiders showing up, she started running through the halls and toward the front door. Just as she reached the front door, but before she could leave, the door slammed. Melissa tried the door, and when it didn't open, she started banging on it. After banging for a while and even calling out for help, she heard, "I'm sorry, Melissa, but I can't let you leave." Melissa slowly turned around, not sure what she'd find, but worried about it. When she did, she noticed a human spider creature standing there and screamed. It laughed, then said, "Screaming won't help. No one comes here, remember? Pretty much everyone stays away." Sometime after she heard that, she said, with a shaky voice, "Stephen? Is that you?" "Yes, it is," it said, his voice sounding somewhat different, though. "I do have a confession to make, though. My name's not really Stephen." He paused, then said, "It doesn't really matter, though. What matters is me, and all the other spiders here have been hoping we'd have company." The creature that Melissa had thought was her friend smiled as it said, "Thank you so much for joining us for dinner." Not too long after that was said, the only thing Melissa could do was watch as what seemed like thousands of spiders surrounded her, and she was encased in a web. She could feel herself being carried somewhere, and, at one point, she heard the voice from before, the one she didn't recognize. Not too long after that, she felt herself pass out. The house still stands, as no one dares to go close enough to demolish it. When Melissa didn't return to school, people eventually realized what had happened. Stories are still told about the house, warning people to stay away. Every now and then, at least one person decides they want to see if the rumors are true, unaware of just how foolish of an idea that is. The spiders are more than happy to welcome their guests, though, and hope for more.